Good morning, dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, everyone who is present here today, and also everyone who is watching us on the internet online. I'd like to say a warm good morning and welcome to you all. Yeah, when I came upon the stage, I realized how fast time flies. Since 2012, I have been offering my perspectives to you regarding the year. And I always think to myself what I can do differently and what I can say differently every time I take to the stage. Well, those who know me would know that I am someone who doesn't like talking too much. That's why when I hit the stage, the first thing that comes to my mind is this. Well, you have come all the way to lend a listening ear to me. So I'd like to thank you very much for that, for your attention, for your participation, and this has become a tradition over the years. Now it's 2018, and this year as well, when I was extended an invitation, I thought to myself, I said, everyone knows me by now. So what else can I possibly say on the stage? I thought to myself, because I didn't want to repeat myself. I said maybe I should change the color of my hair, just to do something differently. And I also wondered why we gather, what we are here for. Actually, this is like an internal assessment for us once every year. It starts off with Veysel Bey, and then we listen to new perspectives, different perspectives, and during my presentation, I will do my best to present you with these. And also, communication is key. Um, and no matter where we work, we get together and we forge relations, good friendships. That's why I wanted to thank the organization committee as well, and welcome once again. Hopefully, it's going to be a pleasurable day. Now, what did we discuss last year? We had a bit of a dismal atmosphere this time last year, and we again said some positive things. The growth is good, PMIs are high, global trade is on the rise. There's vitality in the construction sector. That's what we discussed last year. And looking back, I realized that 2017, the last quarter of 2017, and the last quarter of 2018, the year in between, was a year full of the best and the worst as well. It was a historic moment for us, a historic period for all of us. As I was preparing this talk, I actually had a phone conversation with Veysel Bey, and uh, we were very happy because we were going to talk at a SteelOrbis event. And of course, things were a bit challenging in the steel industry this year. As Veysel Bey has mentioned, we went through many ups and downs. We were trying to discuss what to talk about, and dear Veysel, he said, this year, if we need to make sure that we hit the stage and make people happy and make people hopeful. That's why I wanted to um, instill some hope in all of you, also including myself. So let's see if I can accomplish that with my presentation. If I were to ask you, well, actually, this is the window that we're talking about. Like, there's a normalization vis-a-vis the Fed, QE, trade wars, devaluation in foreign currency, lax financial attitudes, political tensions, domestic currency losses, high inflation, the list goes on and on. And um, it could be the topic of another presentation, but it wouldn't be very fruitful. So I'm not going to focus on these things a lot. In my working life, there's something that has affected me a lot, an anecdote that I'd like to share with you. It was about 15 years ago, I remember well, and at the time I was working at a company, and in order to, well, um, in order to follow some matters, I had to travel to Hong Kong, and technology was not really well advanced at the time. News resources were not really accessible at the time. There were these small rooms, small tables, 4 or 5 people would get together and manage billions of dollars in terms of volume. I would go and talk to them and try to understand how they did it. and I couldn't get the hang of it. I didn't realize how they were doing it, and then I went to a trade director, and I said, you know, that I was really curious about something. I was trying to follow what was going on, but I didn't really understand how do you decide on the position, when to buy, when to sell. How do you manage your business? How do you give all these instructions to your team? I asked. And then this person said to me something that I thought about quite a lot later on. He said, when you take a look at economy, um, you should realize that economy is part of the human psychology. You need to bear in mind the human psychology. When things are going bad, people talk about what's going bad, and people always anticipate the worst is yet to come. And when that happens, when people talk about what's going to get worse, we need to discuss what can be better, how can we position ourselves, and this is basically what we do, he said. And when things are going really well, people are really positive. When the markets are bullish, we look at around us, and I talk to people, talk to players, talk to manufacturers, and if people are really happy, if everything is going so well, then I stop my team and I say, this is it. From now on, we need to prepare for the worst. Now let's go back and prepare for the rainy day. That's how I do it, he said, and this became my motto. And when things are going really well, you need to prepare for the worst. But when people are talking about how bad things are, you need to prepare for the better, and take a look at yourself and trying to find out how you prepare for that. And every Monday we have sales meetings, and this is how I have tried to manage my team. So what I'm going to be talking about today is, first of all, global growth that pertains to the steel industry. How is this growth going to affect us? And then I will talk about China. We are bound by the developments in China, the production in China. I will cover, and also growth rates in China. Protectionism is another topic that I will cover. The Turkish economy, our expectations regarding the Turkish economy. But I'm going to do my best to present you with different perspectives rather than things that everyone is also knowledgeable about. All right. Global economy continues to grow. That remains the case. The world, um, in terms of the average for the last 30 years, the world continues to grow, and the growth rate is high enough. This is quite spectacular. And also, there's one more thing that we have been discussing, countries that are experiencing devaluation, some countries with stagnation, some with shrinkage of their economy. But if the economic growth is really robust all around the world, how do we reconcile that? Actually, here's the thing. The countries that are experiencing these difficulties, their economic size is actually only 4% of the global economic volume. And by looking at this 4%, we draw conclusions on the global economy, and we talk about impending doom and gloom. Now, this is what the world is like right now. You see the total economic throughput. 20 trillion comes from the US. Things are very well in the US. $18 trillion from the EU zone, 2% growth there as well. And following a lengthy period of recession, they're very happy with where they are. China, 13 trillions, and the growth there is also quite good. The total of these three jurisdictions is 63% of the overall global volume. And also when you look at India, there's an acceleration. South America, things are going fine. ASEAN region is the rising star of the world, and the growth is going to be great. So actually, in terms of growth around the world, we do not see any significant problems. So how come we're experiencing what we're experiencing? Actually, sometimes I tend to think that we miss the big picture. In 2019, things are going to be going well, And as a country, and we are breaking records in terms of exports. Everyone wants to export in all industries, not just steel, and the current account deficit is closing. And the reason for that is because things are going fine in many industries the world over. Now, as I've said previously, in not just in 2018 but in 2019 as well, economic growth is going to be really stable in the world. In 2019, we do not see any major setbacks to global growth, and that's a huge advantage for Turkey, and we capitalized on this year, and this will continue next year. But why do we talk about global crises then? I think we tend to like this. When people talk about these things, they get bogged down by this discussion. And also, there are some risks and there are some indicators of risk, or some people who always talk about doomsday scenarios. Maybe we do that a bit too much, but when we look at look at our businesses, we see that the economies are fine and things are going well in other countries as well, and that's something that we need to recognize. We've talked about growth, and we've been through a lot of volatility. How about currencies? Because this is something that we have discussed quite often, and this was published by an economist who works at an international finance corporation. This was published online. This is a chart for emerging market currencies, and I believe these are important because they form the expectations, and in financial markets these assessments are very important. This is what this chart tells us is this axis Y in January 18. These are the currencies, whether they have appreciated or depreciated. An x-axis is how things have fared up until today. Turkish lira was overvalued at the beginning of the year, and a devaluation was expected to take place in Turkey. And as for today, the Turkish lira has lost value, and it is almost on a par with what it needs to be, but a bit undervalued. When you look at many currencies around the globe, you see that at the beginning of the year they were undervalued, and they became even less valuable following the recent developments. If things go well in the world, these currencies will appreciate. There are many studies to that effect, and we have been rebounding recently, and it is because of that. Volatility is going down, and if there are positive developments around the globe, things are going to look even brighter, and it seems as if we are going through such a period, or entering such a period.
Now let's talk about China. Everybody talks about this. There is a downward trend for growth in China. There is devaluation of the yuan, and people are wondering if China will go through the same process that they had in 2016 and 17, being a troublemaker for the world steel sector. I'll tell you that I don't think they will be a troublemaker for the world, making things hard for the steel sector. We don't have such an expectation, because this time China is really moving in a very planned, controlled manner. They're managing everything in a very planned manner, and government incentives are functioning as a very important mechanism. Talking about government incentives, not only for China but for the entire world, the government incentives are very important now. Many countries are protecting their industry because people have drawn important lessons from previous years and previous crises, and they don't want to face the same situation again. So governments want to make sure that they're in a safe position. So not only for Turkey but for the entire world, the general trend in industry is to support production. So for fixed assets investments, we don't expect any decline for the coming year in the world. This is important because this is going to make our hand stronger for the steel sector, supporting consumption as well. Same holds true for China as well. I recently read that this infrastructure investment effort that started in 2018 amounts to 3.5 billion yuan. So we will see the impacts next year. There are many regulations in terms of reducing income tax and VAT. So there is important amount of liquidity being launched in the market. Only most recently they have provided 175 billion US dollars worth of liquidity injected in the market. So thinking about all these things, we're not concerned about China. The world won't face a similar situation in the coming days caused by China. So in trade wars, we see this graph having a great impact. What does this graph tell us? This is about Chinese economic growth. We had the double-digit growth rates that are no longer there, and the world is wondering if the Chinese economy is cooling down or not. But this graph tells us that during those years when China had double-digit growth rates, the economic output they created was about 600 billion US dollars between 2005 and 10, and now their economic size is incredibly high. In 2018 they grew only by 0.5% of this, meaning 6.5%, but the economic output they created is 1.2 trillion US dollars. So looking at it, should we be concerned about China growing at 6.5%? We shouldn't be concerned, and on the contrary, we should think the following. China, back in 2010, in terms of its total size, when they reach 2020, they will be doubling its size. We are going to have yet another China added to the China that we had back in 2010, and that's their target actually for 2020. Everybody thinks, that there is an alarming situation. They say, Chinese growth went down to 6.5%, but no, there is no alarming situation, at least for the steel industry. There is no problem from that perspective. Yes, after having talked about all these things, let's talk about pricing issues. Everyone is wondering about pricing. Well, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to talk on the stage about the most recent pricing issues, but I want to talk about the general trends. On the top of the slide, you see a graph about the long-term development of prices. And just like the world, we said the world economic growth is its average size. We can say that prices created since 2005, we're also seeing that we're having an average level, and we had a slight volatility in prices. Why is it an average level, and why is this volatility? First, the demand is supporting this. There is a very robust demand in the world. And the second thing is protectionism. Many aggressive exporters are not able to enter large markets now. And as I will be talking about it in a while, we have the raw materials that have a certain balance now, and the prices, raw material prices, input prices are also there. Because of this, we have the price levels like this. In this graph, what I wanted to show you is the following. I talked about it on the left-hand side. You have the economic size of world countries. Right next to it, you have the steel consumption of the same countries. First three countries constitute 64% of the total global economic output, and the same three countries in terms of steel consumption, they constitute 64% of the world. So that being the case, we said let's add the economic sizes of countries on this axis of increase or decrease in consumption. So according to their economic sizes, what is the expectation of countries' consumptions for this year? So it seems that big large countries' steel consumption expectations are positive. And those countries for which we expect a decline, their share in world steel consumption is very limited. So this year in 2018, in an exceptional way, in fact, the world total steel consumption is expected to grow by 4%, which is a very high rate. The World Steel Union never comes up with very high predictions, but this is an exceptional year. So next year, on top of the growth this year, we're going to add yet another 1.5% of growth, and in no region they are expecting a decrease in steel consumption. And for emerging markets such as India, we have vibrant countries, which is a start. Asian region is a start. South America is expected to do well. So in 2019 is going to be a strong year in the world for steel consumption, and some regions will be exceptionally doing well. These are the forecasts for the coming year. Of course, a footnote here. When the growth is good in the world and when the demand is robust, the high oil prices also increase steel prices. There is a direct correlation between the two, so you need to follow up on the oil prices as well. Yes, input or raw material prices. I said world growth is doing average and prices are average, so no surprise that the raw materials are very close to the average levels. For ore, we used to talk about it. There was a surplus of supply, which is no longer the case. In 2012, we had a force majeure situation, which is no longer the case. And we don't have a shrinkage in demand. So it's a very balanced situation currently. But on top of this, we have a current situation. The facilities that closed down in China, production constraints made people to look for better quality mines. So the 62 FI index that used to help us is no longer meaningful for managing our work. So the premiums are so high that previously a pellet film that was $20 can reach all the way up to $100. So an ore that is worth $70 costs actually $100 to $200 for a facility. Not only for pellets, but for many products now, according to their components, you can have additional premiums, and this is challenging the steel producers in terms of raw material. We were talking about it with my friends, and I said, okay, let's take a look at this. We always look at the ore to scrap ratio, but many facilities don't directly use the ore and they use pellets. So if we were to check the pellet to scrap ratio, you see the graph on the right hand side. So scrap, relatively, including the pellet premiums, is seeing its record low levels in history. So integrated facilities are actually increasing the scrap demand. So scrap prices, despite all developments, are strong because of this. This could be explained by this. And there will be more demand for scrap. In China, it's 20% among total steel production, and in 2025, use of scrap is expected to reach 30%. So, both for ore and scrap side, this will not result in a situation where the prices will go down. So, looking at coal and ore side, the graph explains the recent situation, by the way. So no matter what the steel prices are, there is no change in the raw materials. Even if the steel prices go up or go down, the raw material prices don't change. So compared to the steel prices, there is a negative correlation. So There are times when the ore prices are increasing, when the steel prices are decreasing. And unfortunately, this is a reality because there is no longer surplus of supply, and there is increasing demand for good quality ores. It's the same thing for coal as well. Now, mines in China have closed down and they became an importing country. And not only for China, but in all countries producing coal, there are problems in terms of transportation, which are still valid, and this is causing the coal prices to remain high this year, and the expectations are that it will be the same trend in 2019. So, looking at the price elements, this is what we take into consideration. There is no change in raw material prices. And this year, in the new contracting period, premiums will be on the agenda, and these being the conditions, with the new pricing balances, the producers will, at the end of the day, have to reflect these raw material prices to their prices. So we have to monitor the developments in this area. Yes, negative correlation is also related with another development, that is the options market. In the past, we used to look at it a lot. How are the markets doing in options market? Is it up? Is it down? It's no longer a situation where consumers can go and understand the trends. If you ask why, because they have a similar course with the financial markets, and certain investors are using it to protect themselves, and you have speculative transactions that shape it. So, starting from the beginning of this year, it's an independent environment with the spot prices. So, these futures and forwards markets, options markets are like this. So, if they no longer have anything to do with the raw materials, and if we can't get anything from the futures and forwards markets, so how are we going to cope with this? I remember a joke. Temel, a famous character, his son takes a test and he was curious how well his son did. So he comes and he asks his son, "How was your test? Were the questions difficult?" And his son doesn't give a lot of interest. He rubs his shoulders and he said, "No, Daddy, the questions were easy, but the answers were difficult," his son says. So that's the situation. Yes, the questions are easy, but the answers are difficult. So there is no standard answer. Every year we have new elements that factor in. Well, in the previous years we were able to understand the prices looking at these indicators, but this is no longer the case. So we just know that the countries are trying to incentivize the economy, trying to keep it vibrant. So for us, not only for steel producers, but those who produce other goods out of steel products, this is actually an opportunity. So I talked about production and the balance between supply and demand, and one of the topics that we talk a lot is the situation in China. We're wondering what's going to happen in November. For certain facilities, there will be some untightening. So every day we hear new news. One day they say no, there is no decrease in production, and another day people say no, there will be a decrease in production. So the best is to look at the figures currently. These are the production figures for the second half of October is announced, and the trend is very similar to last week. Just a slightly downward trend is seen. So as I have said, I really believe in China's ability to balance this. So they are managing this well. So they won't be creating an overcapacity this year. And they won't be aggressively involved in exports and causing trouble for the rest of the world. That's what I believe. Let's follow up on the developments altogether, because for a long time we believe that China is not determining the steel market, and you can see it in this graph. This graph shows us that, well, look at the right hand side, please. It shows us that that nightmare year for all of us, 2015. We had that overcapacity, 250 million tons, and since 2015 what has changed? We have the closed down capacity, 150 million tons. There is an increase of consumption of 80 million tons, and as of today the overcapacity in China is 55 million tons. 55 million tons, thinking about the total size of China, is not a significant amount. So that overcapacity in China is not expected to become a trouble for the world. So we shouldn't be too concerned about this. And there is also a sharp increase in the Chinese domestic steel consumption. Looking at it, we see a vibrant situation in steel construction. For instance, rebar compared to flat products are having premiums, so this shows us that we have a high demand and a lot of infrastructure investments going on. What about trade wars? Protectionism? Well, looking at this, I think of the following analogy. When we were kids, when we were children, we would play that stone, paper, scissors game. Stone is like the economic growth of the world. Protectionism is just like that paper wrapping that stone. We'll see if it will wrap it and have an impact on economic growth. But then there is a developing technology. We have globalization that is a part of our lives. Well, you can't change that anymore. And with globalization, well, we can call globalization as the Caesars, and it will cut the protectionism and let it free. So at the one way or another, at the end of the day, we will get out of this situation. Mr. Veysel talked about this very well, how we approach this issue as Turkish producers. So within the WTO rules, we don't want unfair competition and unfair trade. Turkey is one of the countries, one of the most liberal countries in terms of these policies, and we respect this because trade needs to be made with right laws and rules. And as Turkish producers, we are facing so many unfair situations all around the world, but we continue to struggle. Most recently, in the WTO panel in Morocco, we have been working for this, against this anti-dumping duty that is imposed unfairly on Turkish producers, and there was a decision in favor of us, and we want the problem to be solved as soon as possible, and we'll see how soon it will be solved. So this 25% additional duty hopefully will be solved as soon as possible. We're seeing nice signs of this problem being solved soon. So in the last decade we have doubled, we have seen a 2 times increase in China, and then we have US trying to stop China, waging trade wars. We always talk about this. Looking at this graph, I just think of a social sciences theory. The English name is law of unintended consequences. What does this mean? An individual, or mostly a government, in order to get a result, they take an action, but they can come up with a consequence that was not foreseen beforehand. And those unintended consequences shape the world history. Some thinkers actually say that this law of unintended consequences is what shapes the entire world history. Why am I telling you this? Because this is what America, US is doing, trying to stop China. They're trying to stop China, but they're helping Asia to develop overall. So Asian countries have trade between themselves, and China, India, Japan, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, Taiwan are coming together now, and they are having trade talks and agreements among themselves now. So In the beginning of 2000s, their trade was 50%, but it increased to 70% now among Asian countries. So there is an overall development in Asia thanks to this struggle between US and China. So this is also how you should read these developments. Most recently, there was a Chinese journal, a magazine on my desk, and I was just thinking about my slides for this presentation, and I thought it was a secret message because the cover was saying the new vision. China is offering a new exit to the world economies. That was what's written on the cover of the magazine, and I had another newspaper in front of me as well, and there was an ad on it, and it said, "The world is transforming. Are you ready for this?" And I said, this must be a message for me. Two different newspapers and magazines on my desk trying to give me a message. Yes, we are really going through a period where the world is going through a change. We need to understand the dynamics, and we need to ask ourselves, are we really ready for this? We have, for instance, Asian guests with us for years. It's the first time, so welcome. We are not used to see them here, so we are very, very happy that now we are able to see our Asian colleagues with us. Welcome. So, I would like to give some information about protectionism. World trade, steel trade. About 20% of production is related to outside the country trade, and there's a very clear trend here. Exports, trade between within the regions is increasing as years go by. What do I mean within the regions? Meaning EU within EU countries, Asia within Asian countries, Africa within Asian countries. So the trade between these countries of the same region is increasing, and the trade between different regions is slightly decreasing, but not in a radical way. For instance, in 2018, the trade compared to 2017 is more or less at the same level. Well, there are certain regions in the world that always are mentioned with protectionism. US, Canada, for instance, most recently, and EU. And total steel consumption of these countries constitutes only 25% of the world's total steel consumption. So we have 75% outside these countries. So looking at steel trade, we can say that these countries' decisions are not really radically affecting steel trade, because they constitute only 25%. And now, to wrap up, I will give you some information about Turkey. The last quarter was really difficult for all of us, especially managing that volatility in the FX rates was difficult. We had the shrinking domestic demand, and then we had difficulty in finding cash. But the good news is that the worst is over. We have signs of this. I see smiling faces, and I really believe in this. I believe in this. The worst is behind us now. We've gone through a rough patch, and now we will start seeing recovery. Stabilization in the FX rates is very important for us. About the Turkish economy, by the way, we worked on this a lot. We gave it a lot of thought, what will happen. But we've seen that in the last 7 years, Turkey had a very good growth rate, and periodically we had processes or periods where we had problems in the growth. So we see, looking back in history, that even during the most challenging periods, Turkey never shrank for 3 quarters consecutively. So we lived this in this quarter, and our expectation is that somewhere in 2019 there will be a change, because after these shrinkage periods there might be very fast recovery periods. So we believe that recovery will come next year, and we don't know if the recovery will start as of the first quarter or second quarter of 2019, because there are internal and external factors that affect this. So we are actually bullish in our forecasts for the Turkish economy. And let me share some figures with you. On the left hand side, you see the real index confidence index that is directly related to volatility. If volatility increases, the confidence index goes down. And in the recent years, we checked what were the conditions when we had low confidence index rates, and there is a huge difference now. When the confidence index went down, Turkey always saw an increase in its exports. This also explains the graph on the right-hand side. When the confidence index goes down in Turkey, the industrial output increases. Why? So, imagine all the things that I have said so far. Because we were able to manage our businesses well in many sectors, we work with the world, and when I talk to our clients, they always say that they export. So this is how the industry in Turkey recovers and is able to continue the positive trends. So the way we do business in Turkey is also impacted by the banking sector. CBS premiums, we reached levels that we didn't deserve, but now during this current period, there is a regression which is actually relieving us. So after having said all these things, I will talk about a study that we are involved most recently. So when things go well, and when you see certain risks, you have to do something. That's what we did with my colleagues. We sat down and we said, what could go wrong now? So let's make a risk assessment, we said. And as the company, we tried to list down the risks and what we do to get prepared to do something against these risks. And everyone was writing something. Well, someone said maybe another 25% of duty will come on top of the existing 25%. So we made a long list of risks. So when you write these things down, you feel different actually. We tried to see, we actually saw that when you write these risks down, you can get more prepared for them. And you are able to brace for impact easier. So a couple of weeks ago, we also wrote what could go well instead of what the things that could go wrong, and positive things we listed down. And the good news is that some of the positive things that we put on that list are already happening now. We said maybe positive developments will happen in terms of the sanctions against Iran, which happened. We also said maybe there will be an improvement in the FX rates, which is happening now. It's also helping us with volatility. And there was an unexpected thing about Trump, for instance. Trump administration started to give positive signals again. So will there be a trade agreement to put an end to this trade war between them? So they're giving positive messages, which is perceived again positively by the world. So we are excited to see. There is also the discussion about removing this 25% duty imposed on us, and our government is also doing something about it. So Brexit is solved. Imagine Brexit is solved, Italy issue is solved, there is the parity going up, and the embargo protectionist measures are now not causing that much stress anymore. So what would happen under those conditions? Wouldn't this be possible? Yes, it's possible. We can see these things happening.
But what's important here is when these things happen, how ready are we mentally? Are we really up for the task, up for the challenge? That's what we need to discuss. And that's why I wanted to conclude my presentation with some thing that I really like. Everything that you can imagine is real, says Picasso. So what's important is to have the prowess to imagine, but turning it into action. Whether you're ready for that or not is the main question, it seems. Thank you so much.